You're listening to Procurement 6, the weekly podcast from the team at Art of Procurement that summarizes this week in procurement in just 6 short segments.
Hi there, I'm Helen Mackenzie, and today is Friday, February the 11th, 2022.
6.
Welcome to this week's Procurement 6. This week's episode is proudly sponsored by Zip Intake to Procure. Zip is the world's leading intake to procure solution, one place for employees to initiate a purchase or vendor request. We're also delighted to be partnering with Zip on a research paper on the all-important topic of employee experience during the intake to procure process. Now, their experience during the process often defines their perception of the role of procurement, as either a bureaucratic gatekeeper or an enabler of business strategy. So, tell us what you think. Does employee experience really matter to procurement? Head on over to artofprocurement.com/experience survey to give us your thoughts.
5.
This week on the Art of Procurement podcast, we featured a recent AOP Live webinar with Risk International Services Manager Eric Krieg. On a fascinating discussion with Phil about the medical insurance category, Eric shared his wealth of experience of working with a small niche group of suppliers and a particular type of stakeholder. Here's Eric's advice on how to make things work.
Well, so what I would first and foremost say is for a successful engagement, we have to have the right people at the table. Mm-hmm. That means that we have to have executives who have a financial responsibility. And oftentimes that's actually the CFO.
Yeah.
Because what occurs is that, the what I would say the frontline benefits manager, director of benefits, is a very difficult place to live. Mm-hmm. Sometimes there is a CHRO who truly does have financial line of sight to this and has an incentive around it. But we find oftentimes it really needs to be with that executive level CFO who then is willing to take a different view of this world.
Now, although this advice is aimed at managing the employee benefits category, we can use the insight whatever category we're covering. Getting the right people at the table is key to a successful process. Thanks for the tip, Eric.
4.
Does corporate culture really matter to procurement? Can we just get on with our work without reference to the rest of the organisation and how they do things? Well, my colleague Kelly Barner has some great advice over on the AOP blog. Don't be stressed if you've never looked at your company inside that kind of a framework, but do give it some thought. Chances are there are elements of multiple cultures at play in your company, but if you recognise and rank them, creating a complementary procurement experience will be much easier. Thanks, Kelly.
This is Procurement 6 from Art of Procurement. To get notified every time an episode is published, go to artofprocurement.com/subscribe. 3.
Buy now or buy later. It's one of the key pieces of advice procurement gives to stakeholders. But what if the prospects are unclear? And what if there are differing points of view? Well, we've been having an interesting discussion over on LinkedIn this week in the context of corporate travel. The market analysis is pointing to a buy now scenario, whereas some of the comments are a bit more cautious about signing up to longer term deals. For me, it just shows the importance of weighing up all the factors, including the trade-offs between lower cost and being tied into a longer term contract. Now that's a good old procurement dilemma, don't you think?
2.
With blockades and potential pipeline disruption on the one hand and Antipodean border openings on the other, our news this week has a supply chain focus. A report produced this year by the World Economic Forum shows that 8 global supply chain inefficiencies account for more than 50% of carbon emissions, with food alone representing 25%. Online magazine Wired reports that in 2022, companies will see the advantages to be gained by streamlining supply chains through better use of data. Procurement will be a good place to start. In 2022, companies will use data to influence their suppliers to be more sustainable, and they will extend that use of data into every decision, using it, for example, to look at corruption or evidence of forced labour in supply chains. In other news, the supply chain crisis over the last year has caused quite a splash for the book publishing industry, literally. In early January, a large shipping vessel knocked 60 containers carrying cookbooks overboard, and another 89 containers were damaged as the ship rolled in the waves. The Manchester Guardian reports, the loss of books to the stormy seas seems almost like a too apt metaphor for the strain and chaos the coronavirus pandemic has inflicted on the publishing industry, as it struggles to cope with supply issues, paper shortages and a surge in demand. And finally, the dual versus multi-sourcing debate continues in a number of industries, including automotive. In an article published on Just Auto, economist David Leggett reports, the experience of recent years does at least point to companies increasingly asking the question of whether single sourcing is desirable as it once was. A world beset by higher risks and uncertainties perhaps demands a reset in approach. Duplication within the supply chain, even if it does mean getting closer to sharing with a competitor, may offer a better solution, at least for some components, than single sourcing does. Greater product security would be the benefit of dual sourcing. As ever, it's a question of overall cost. Our tip for you, if you're faced with this sort of challenge, is to make use of techniques like supply chain mapping, which is intuitive for products but just as important for services, and failure mode effects analysis. Head on over to Art of Procurement to find out more.
1.
Are you ready for AOP Digital Outcomes? It's a brand new digital conference from Art of Procurement that will take place between March 8th and 10th, 2022. Each day for 2 hours a day, we're going to be taking a different approach to discussing procurement transformation and focusing on what matters most, the outcomes that digital transformations deliver. Through the event, we'll be focused on key themes, driving strategy, speed and scale. And we're delighted to announce that we've got some fantastic speakers confirmed this week. On day 1, IBM's Melissa Drew will explore whether AI can elevate procurement's focus to the strategic, while on day 2, McKinsey partner Johan Raunick will share his thoughts on whether disruption is procurement's digital destiny. And on our final day, Peak Span Capital's Jack Freeman will share why tech investment is going into the scaling procurement outcomes through suppliers. Make sure you don't miss out on all this live content and register now. Head on over to artofprocurement.com/calendar to find out more. And you can find out all of the links associated with the stories mentioned today at the show notes page for this episode at artofprocurement.com/podcast.
Thanks for listening. We'll be back next Friday at 6 a.m. U.S. Eastern Time. If you've enjoyed this pod, help us grow and tell your peers to search for Procurement 6 wherever they get their podcasts.